Paul, I'm worried.
Why is that, Tim?
A new mayoral campaign has been announced by someone named Gwyn. You know what that means.
P.N. Gwyn? Holy election fraud. The Penguin.
Let's check the news and see what we can find out.
Oh, look, Tim, they're about to show up his press conference.
There he is.
Ah, that Gwyn.
To the bat polls.
It's a black hooded figure. You've broken the law. Now he's on your trail. Run, Hizzoner, and say and start accelerating. Or wind up in the Gotham jail. Here he comes now. Look in the sky. It's a bat signal light. He's the man on the scene.
Welcome to the Bat Polls, your number one bat election news source. This is Tim in Tokyo with my brother Paul in Hanover, New Hampshire.
And this is Walter Klondike from Hanover, New Hampshire.
Our theme this time is not exactly the theme. It was sent in by Mr. Glee from the board, who calls it sort of a half-cover, half-rip-off called Here Comes Batman. And he says, performed in the very crummy 1967 made-for-TV horror movie Creature of Destruction. And it was issued on a 45.
Huh. That's shocking that it made it. Well, I guess anybody could, make a few 45s back in those days.
Yeah. Actually, the clip I used for the opening was a different YouTube video with the entire song, and it shows just a picture of the 45. But what he sent us is an actual clip from the movie, and I'll put both clips in the show notes.
Right. The clip from the movie is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. A bunch of people, a bunch of teenagers fruging to the the Batman quasi theme. Did a little bit of research on Creature of Destruction. It's a remake, a color remake of the 1956 film The She-Creature, but it's totally bargain basement, a sub-basement, I think, and made under the auspices of American International Pictures, the company that Roger Corman made a billion, trillion terrible movies for.
Your name for quality entertainment.
And, of course, Roger Corman is also the guy who either produced, directed, or both the original Fantastic Four movie that was made in the early 1990s, not ever to be distributed, but just to run out of copyright. And this movie was apparently made as part of a settlement, of some kind of legal settlement. So, as I was just telling Tim, these are really, really good artistic motivations to create a film as important and aesthetically subtle as Creature of Destruction.
By the way, Wikipedia says 1967, but IMDb says it came out in 68. So I'm a little fuzzy on the date. Actually, I think I did see 67 elsewhere too. So that's probably Mr. Glee's probably right about the year, but I don't know why IMDb says December 68.
Well, maybe that's when it was shown on television, or when it was distributed, if it was a syndicated show. There's no mention of that on Wikipedia, how it was distributed. We certainly haven't found any reference to a major network. Right, yeah, I'm guessing that it was syndicated. I couldn't find any information about that, But there's no reason to find this unless you're a Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan and really, really wants to petition the company, now that they're making new episodes again, to to go after this film in particular. Also, the connection to Batman is so scant as to be nearly non-existent. So even a Batman completist would not need to see this film if you really didn't want to.
Yeah, and even if it's 67, that's a bit late for Bat records. You've seen practically every Bat record we found came out in either 66 or many years later. By 67, it's kind of late to be putting out a single, a Batman-themed single. That's the thing about Poverty Row pictures, though. I think you make it to Poverty Row and no higher as a film producer because you make decisions like that, getting behind the curve
of the not so latest trend, or you're just like, grasping at straws for something that the kids might be into, as they say.
By the way, I realized this movie has a kind of 3 Degrees to Batman connection. So the star of the movie was Les Tremayne, and I felt like I should know that name. So I went digging a bit, and I realized that he was briefly on General Hospital in 1987, substituting for another actor. And who was that actor? It was David Lewis as Edward Quartermain. And so it was just kind of a temporary substitution thing. And so whenever Les Tremayne appeared on screen as Edward Quartermain, you would hear a voice saying, the role of Edward Quartermain is being played by Les Tremayne. So that was why his name stuck in my head. I
see. So what's the Bat connection here?
Yeah, well, because David Lewis was Warden Crichton.
Oh, of course. Yes. Excellent. That's a nice holy deja vu moment.
So, this time we're talking about Hizzoner the Penguin and Dishonor the Penguin, the treatment, first draft, and final by Stanford Sherman. Stanford Sherman's really the only Batman writer who tried to do full-on satire on the show. And it's certainly not a Sempleian thing. I don't think Semple would have envisioned Batman going this direction. You can argue about whether it works or not. Batwinged Hornet certainly argued against in our message board thread about the script.
Yeah, he found it pretty politically tone deaf, I think.
So I've got his message here. Okay. He says, some people really like this arc and think it's a, quote, great, unquote, send-up of then modern politics. But the problem with Sherman's script is that it's far too cynical to the point where it comes off as Sherman being ignorant. It reminds me of high school and college students who take a couple of classes and suddenly they think they have all things political figured out, when anyone listening to them is thinking, where the hell did they get this stuff? That's much of my take on the final script for Hizzoner the Penguin. For most TV producers, looking ahead to syndication is common. Milk the product as long as you can, but this arc is so topical about one period of time, with references or allegedly humorous substitutions for real people, that it would no longer be relevant in only a few short years. Unlike 12 O'Clock High, Combat, or even F Troop, which took place in older fixed periods of time, Batman was set in a contemporary environment with characters and settings that were a bit more relatable to some future viewers. That said, it lost that relatability with all the political satire, and it's one of the prime examples of the series leaving its action-adventure roots to become a nonsensical attempt at comedy. So, I can certainly see how this doesn't age as well. For example, the references to Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley, if you don't know 1960s network news, it'll go flying over your head.
Yeah, even the Goodnight Chet, Goodnight David stuff from the old NBC News broadcast is completely out of the can of just about, well, we know it, but we missed that period too. At least I did. I only know it because it was constantly referred to in comedy shows and such, even though it had been, Huntley and Brinkley were no longer the co-anchors of the show by the time I remember. NBC was, John Chancellor was the anchor on the NBC Nightly News by the time I have any recall of that period.
Yeah, when I was a preschooler, I used to watch Huntley and Brinkley with Dad. You may not even been born yet.
No,
so I knew the Goodnight Chet, Goodnight David firsthand. So, and I think that we still referred to it around home, like in the 70s, even after it was that was gone. And I think Chet Huntley had died.
But we still referred to it as Huntley Brinkley, or our parents probably did.
Well, or maybe when we were saying good night, we'd say, "Oh, good night, Chet, good night, David," or something.
We were more likely to say good night, John Boy, by that time. I take Batwinged Hornet's point. It makes me wonder if I should mind this episode more, because it's not that I don't. I hadn't thought about the fact that this arc is is political satire, which seems un-Semplian at some level, because Semple's, not too interested in that. On the other hand, Semple was interested in, kind of speaking to kids. And if this political satire is for anybody, it's for kids. It's so simplified and so broad that it's almost like, a child's garden of political satire. Robert Louis Stevenson's less famous work of poetry.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, well, that's another point, is that a lot of it would probably fly over 1966 kids' heads.
Right.
And by this point, the adults were kind of leaving. Mm-hmm. It's not season 3 yet, but it seems like summer of 66, the air kind of went out of the balloon for the adults.
Mm-hmm. But there's so many references that are, meant to address the adults, like, those moments of gasp direct address by Batman to the camera, saying, wouldn't our republic be in a mess if, if X or Y happened? And of course, the point is that, in fact, politicians do lie and voters are ill-informed a good chunk of the time. Mm-hmm. So that's something the kids would totally not get, but at least some adults would, if they were paying any attention by this time, would have probably picked up on.
Yeah, sure. High C also commented, so much of this arc is set in the real political world of 1966 with pollsters, confused voters, TV pundits, scheming politicians, etc. This arc wants to have it both ways, and it ain't fair to Batman. Penguin can play that game, and he can't. I mean, come on, what Gotham City judge wouldn't issue Batman a search warrant in 20 minutes? Remember, he is a state actor, per attorney Jim Dedman in episode 112.
Yes, so true. We can't prove it, Robin, is Batman's, constant refrain. He says it even more frequently in the earlier versions of the script. We can't pin it on Penguin that we wound up nearly being, dumped into sulfuric acid. Well, actually, you probably can. I mean, who owns this warehouse anyway that's supposedly run by this, kind of union-type organization called Goon?
So in episode 147, when we talked about Stanford Sherman's letters to his girlfriend, of which scans were provided by Mitch Kaba.
Yay!
We said in that episode, and High C mentioned this in his post also, that Sherman was unhappy with how the filmed episode came out. Mm-hmm. He wrote, "The Penguin show was a crime. They drew, quartered, racked, and bastinadoed the poor thing. The remaining corpse would have been better eaten by the worms." So I went into this wondering if we would see evidence of what the changes were that he didn't like.
Right.
It's a little hard to know because did the final come from Stanford Sherman's typewriter, or was somebody else typing these revisions? We can't really know, I think.
Yeah, I mean, because the episode is still largely his name would still have to appear on it. I mean, just hypothetically, if this was ghosted and, repaired or doctored, I should say, the script doctor came in and, fixed it up. Nevertheless, enough of it is Stanford Sherman's script that no other name would be allowed to be attached to it by the Writers Guild.
If it was Charles Hoffman, that's his job, to fix the script. And so his name is there as script editor and not writer. But
But here's the question. I mean, the final I didn't spend a whole lot of time with because the final is nearly indistinguishable from the episodes, the actual episodes from the arc, which I rewatched, and I know you did as well. So, but, do we find changes, I guess, is the big question. Do we find substantial changes or just, small changes like shortening the script, for example, which is something that probably Horowitz asks for in the first draft?
Yeah.
Or making sure there are more holies in the script because there are no holies in the original draft.
Right. Yeah, the cuts that happened at a late stage kind of stuck out to me as things that Sherman would wince at because there were a couple that I thought really hurt the script. But we'll get to those.
Okay.
By the way, both of these scripts have Bat Leader written on them. Bat Leader is Dozier, right? So I think these are Dozier's copies.
kind of cool.
rather than Horowitz's. So I took the notes on them to be Dozier's. And on the first draft, he writes in this really thick pen that makes it kind of hard to read what he wrote. But I think I figured it out.
Yeah, I think I did as well. Let's see if we came up with the same translation. Well, let's see. Put in Holies, also add Harriet in one part, not both, which wound up being the way
That's
it
what
was.
happened.
What happened, right? Batcave scenes.
Supers over fights.
Right.
The supered fight sounds.
But what is this up at the top? Oh, have Mayor and Commissioner's office and save a set.
Ah, okay. I guess I didn't quite make that one out.
Dozier says, let's not build another set. And that's in fact what happens. The mayor shows up in the commissioner's office instead of showing up in his own office, being given either a sedative or a stimulant. It's kind of hard to tell.
I think it depends on which version you're looking at.
Right.
Yeah, we never did see the mayor's office on the series at any point that I can remember. So, well, let's talk about the treatment first.
Okay.
Now, in the treatment and the first draft, Sherman has the mayor of Gotham City as Mayor Lindy. And I suspect that he was doing his own parody of Mayor Lindsay and didn't realize the show already had Mayor Linseed, dating back to the Joker Trumps an Ace in season 1. Another thing I noticed throughout is that Sherman often writes people referring to the city as simply Gotham, which I think was fairly common in the comics, but as shot, it's always Gotham City. So I think we found another rule of the show here, that you have to call the town Gotham City, not Gotham.
That's right, because Gotham would refer to New York. It's a nickname for the city. And they certainly don't want to confuse this fictional city with a real city or, get in trouble with the actual mayor of New York.
The reaction to Penguin announcing his candidacy at this stage is really over the top. Gordon looks into the camera and says, "I think I'm losing my mind." And the mayor is lying on the couch getting a sedative shot in the treatment. Another thing I noticed, all of these documents, to varying degrees, have Penguin revealing to the audience that he's planning to make the city safe for crime if he wins. But in the broadcast version, you don't really get that until election night. And I think that was intentional, kind of leaving the idea lingering in the audience's mind that, well, maybe Penguin has got good intentions. And then at the end, nope.
Of course, every child watching the show would have known that Penguin has no good intentions.
Sure.
But they are at least leaving a tiny little crack open for that possibility.
And then there are details like at election headquarters, the, quote, not-so-blind news dealer and the hood who tried to rob him, unquote, are both working for Penguin.
Right. And there are some things that get changed even into, one thing that gets changed in, I think, the first draft, and then another that gets changed in the final. It doesn't get changed until the final. One thing that doesn't get changed until the final is that Sherman initially wanted everything the Penguin does that is simply narrated by, or told us, in expository lines by Commissioner Gordon, actually gets shown on the screen.
The Penguin did what? Floored a thug who was holding up a blind news dealer? Was polite to a police officer? Saved a baby in a buggy from being hit by a truck? And then donated $100,000 to the Gotham City Charity Fund.
So not only does he save the blind news hawker or newsman, he also we also see him
catching the baby carriage,
and giving the $100,000 check to the Gotham charity so the food bank can stay open.
Yeah, well, that's one of many examples of just how unnecessarily long the script is. There's so much that's cut. Even from the final, some pages are cut.
Yeah. Well, and none of this is unusual because we've seen in many other scripts, and it's got to be, epidemic in TV of this era, that especially a novice screenwriter, but even, some professionals who've been around for a while, will write out scenes that are, completely unnecessary and too expensive as far as just a kind of, slim and
trim and economical script would go.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin Podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin Podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
Jack Kirby's 1960s Marvel Comics work with Stan Lee created some of the most fondly remembered comics of the 20th century. If you're like us, you probably know about his early 1970s work for DC, but you've read little or none of it. Here at Deconstructing Comics, Emmett and I decided to change that. We've launched into a series of episodes in which we read all of Kirby's Fourth World, from the first appearance of Darkseid in Jimmy Olsen's book, to the long-delayed finale, The Hunger Dogs. What we found is unrestrained creativity that's a bit rough around the edges. This is Tim. Join us as we visit the Wild Area, the planets of New Genesis and Apocalypse, plus good old Metropolis, as we read Jimmy Olsen, The Forever People, New Gods, and Mr. Miracle. We're at deconstructingcomics.com or look for Deconstructing Comics wherever you find your podcasts. I made a list of differences that are unique to the treatment.
Okay.
So the bat fight as political convention scene is crammed into part 1. Mm-hmm. And it takes place at a bank. And I'm assuming they moved it to a convention hall to play more into the convention idea.
Right.
The pollsters say that 2 old ladies polled as supporting not Harry Goldwinter, but Calvin Coolidge. And I'm wondering if they thought that including the name of a politician who, 1966 is still in living memory, might have been a bad idea. I mean, if you figure it out, if you do the math, it's like if now there was a reference to Reagan like that.
Right. Well, but, Goldwinter is definitely a reference to Goldwater, to Barry Goldwater.
Yeah, it's a parody name, but it's not actually Gold. Of course, Goldwater was still around at the time, but...
Oh, yeah, he was very much around. Deep in your heart, he's right.
Maybe they were thinking that it's better to parody a recent name than bring in a real name from 40 years ago. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I meant to look into this a little bit, but when the pollsters keep mentioning and come back to this almost like a jingle that Harry I almost called him Goldmember. I'm thinking of Austin Powers. And that Harry Goldwinter is the monarchist candidate. I'm not quite sure what they're getting at, except that Barry Goldwater was really, really, really conservative. But I'm not sure if that necessarily lines up with monarchist. I'd just be interested in digging into that history a little bit further.
So, of course, we get a reference to Robin driving the Batmobile in the treatment.
I laughed out loud at that. He's a chubby 8-year-old. Oh, wait a minute. He still can't drive.
Page 10 of the treatment explicitly mentions that the Pengy girls are meant as references to Johnson girls and Goldwater girls in 1964. One of those dated references.
Right, right.
And, by the way, can you name a famous woman who was a Goldwater girl?
No, I absolutely can't.
Hillary Clinton.
A Goldwater girl?
Yeah. She was a Republican at that age.
That's right. Wow. Huh. Okay, I'm going to be speechless for the rest of the episode now.
Okay, so with that stuffed into part 1, part 2 gets straight to the election. So it turns out that not only can convicted felons legally run for office in Gotham City, but also, under the Gotham City Charter of 1793, the voting age in Gotham City is 14. Now, what's odd is that nobody seemed to know this. The authorities don't know it. Only Batman knows it.
Yeah.
Or maybe he does some research. Like, how would this have been forgotten? So Batman busses in a bunch of teenagers to vote for him.
Yes, which is so un-Batman-like. I mean, seriously. And, one of the comments that Dozier apparently makes in the first draft is that Batman would never would never agree to allowing Mayor Linseed to, run as his deputy mayor and then have Batman resign immediately so that Mayor Linseed could just accede to mayor.
Yeah,
of course, that's what he does anyway, but it's not.
Batman would not be that devious.
Well, exactly. It sounds, it's. I think the note in the margin says something like, Batman is too honest for that, or he wouldn't stoop to that.
That's what he said. But I think Batman is not that devious.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
Yeah, wrong. Batman isn't devious. Just have Batman ask him to run as deputy mayor, and there's a big X there.
Right.
High C's comment about this, and I felt like this at first. He writes, I was dismayed to see the deletion of the part in which Batman discovered the loophole about teenagers being allowed to vote. The final script never really explains why the tide suddenly turns his way. Plus, it would have been nice to see him, use his mind instead of just being an idiot spectator. So, yeah, I liked it in terms of, we have an explanation for why Batman won. But then when I realized how odd it was that nobody would have known that was the law, then it kind of loses some shine for me.
Right. Well, for one thing, it's devious. Right. It's the same trick that Penguin pulled, which doesn't seem, I don't think it would seem like fair play to the Adam West, Semple Batman. The other thing is that, because, there's at least a mock sense of, goodwill out, and good will eventually win that we get from this because, Batman is shown as, in the final version, Batman is shown as square at every moment. He will not hire even a brass band, no showmanship. And even Robin asks him for some showmanship. He still, plays it boring and tiny, all the way through. It's not much of a campaign, especially when Penguin is serving champagne and having like belly dancers and Paul Revere and the Raiders. But it seems like philosophically, it makes total sense that it's not some devious trick that gets Batman elected. It's just that things turn out the way they're supposed to because, the voters actually do understand that Batman would be a better mayor than the Penguin. And that's exactly the kind of optimism that Batman has had all along that everyone's been teasing him about or just like dismissing him over. So I think this has to happen in order for this to be Semplian in a way. Because it's got to be honest about its squareness. Even if the squareness is totally mockery, it's being totally honest about, this is the way that things will happen because Batman is right.
Yeah.
Batman can't be wrong, right?
Right, it's his show.
Even if it's a satire, he can't be wrong.
So this bit with teenagers voting for Batman and adults voting for Penguin, it turns into this generation gap type of thing, which, got to be a major cultural idea in the late 60s. And this thing with teens vote for Batman, even though their Penguin-loving parents have promised them a good strapping when they get home. I cannot imagine talking about corporal punishment of kids in Batman.
Oh, no. Absolutely not.
So then Penguin, carrying a flute and accompanied by a, quote, raucous rock and roll band playing music to soothe the savage adolescent, unquote, they act as a Pied Piper to lead away, quote, a band of fruging, swimming, jerking kids. So, I mean, this starts to feel like he's just parodying teenagers. A little bit earlier, it felt like, he was praising the teens, but now he's making fun of them. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I kept thinking about this 1968 film called Wild in the Streets, where, a kid, I think he's 17 years old, becomes president, and they decide they're going to, pretty much
imprison anybody over 30. It's another cheapo. I believe it's American International Pictures. It's not directed by Roger Corman. It's directed by Barry Shear. But, it's one of those films that's kind of amazing because, even Hal Holbrook is in it back before he was a star. It's like, and there's a scene that takes place in Congress that's actually like an old church that they kind of like retrofitted or, banged around with to make it not look like Congress at all. Doesn't look anything like it. But it feels as though this is heading toward that level of satire momentarily, at least, by showing the 16-year-olds frugging their way to political awareness, but really being about hippies pulling away from their parents and feeling their the power of their collective disagreement against the adults.
So Penguin leads the teenagers onto a barge that goes out on the river, and then he calls Batman by radio telephone and says, unless the Gotham City Council meets and invalidates the election, appointing him as mayor in place of Batman, the kids will find themselves frugging on the river bottom. But then the rock band collapses from exhaustion, and the kids rise up in protest, attacking Penguin and his hoods. Penguin and some of the henchmen manage to get over the side of the boat and into a getaway boat as Batman and Robin are approaching in, quote, their speedboat. He doesn't say the Batboat. There's a chase, the duo catches up with them, and of course there's a bat fight, and guess who wins? Because it's the end of the episode.
Okay.
The tag scene in The Treatment is a version of what ended up being broadcast, but so Batman is in the Batcave and receives a call on the Bat phone from LBJ himself asking Batman to be his campaign manager. Mm-hmm. It feels a little bit like Sherman is cribbing from the Batman movie because he says, can we sneak in a shot of a large office chair from behind showing a hand hanging up the telephone and a Stetson hat visible over the top of the chair? and sure, let's get Van Williams to
Sure, why not? But then these last couple of lines are just hysterical, and I don't quite understand what they mean. I must be thick-headed, but wow, says Robin. This is from The Treatment. You talked to him for a whole minute. It was nice of him to call, says Bruce, and I hope you like chili. His wife is sending us a 5-gallon crock of it. And then the last line is clearly editorial commentary. We fade out, call a taxi, and catch the first plane to Brazil. What in the heck does that mean?
I mean, Sherman is like representing for us here the end of like it's kind of like politics going to hell in a handbasket for good and all this time. Maybe he doesn't like chili. I don't know.
Yeah, like you said, the final doesn't have a lot of differences from what was broadcast. So the rest of my notes are mainly about the first draft, and I just inserted a few things about the final at the appropriate points.
Okay.
So both versions have Penguin arriving in a limousine, but the car that's on screen is certainly not a limousine. I guess that was outside the budget. It's just a car. I'd like to know what model it was. There's some writing on the side I couldn't make out.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and like you mentioned, we see him catching the runaway baby carriage. His umbrella handle shoots off on a wire and catches the carriage. And he donates the $100,000. And, yeah, Gordon doesn't recount all that on the phone with Sims because we've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of things about Dick practicing for Macbeth at home.
Okay.
I've never understood why Alfred is lying on the floor in this scene.
I don't know Macbeth well enough to know the answer to that question either.
Yeah, because I looked it up, and it doesn't seem like there's anybody lying on the floor, dead or alive, in that scene. But also, the dagger is a specter of a dagger. There's not a real dagger in that scene. But Dick is holding an actual dagger in his hand.
Hark! Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand? Come! Let me clutch thee. I have thee not, yet I see thee still.
It's very nice that you're playing the lead in Macbeth, Dick, but don't forget that you have a civics exam coming up.
Looks like a letter opener to me.
Yeah, or maybe it's a letter opener.
It's a spectral letter opener.
But yeah, you don't really need a prop in that scene.
No, and you would think it would actually, you'd want to feel, you'd want to learn how to feel, what the letter opener felt like in your hand so that you could, adequately, pretend to be holding one when you actually, when you're actually on stage.
Sherman characterizes the bat phone ringing as beepity blink, which I thought was amusing.
Yes.
Because it's beeping and it's blinking, so.
Right.
So both scripts have some version of Gordon receiving a newspaper from either O'Hara or Linseed with the headline, Penguin to run for mayor of Gotham City. Mm-hmm. In the final, it's Linseed. And in the filmed version, you can see that newspaper on Gordon's desk. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, surely they wouldn't have mocked up that newspaper without getting a direct shot of it. And you see a direct shot in the recap in part 2.
In the recap, but not in the episode 1.
So they clearly shot that scene and then cut it except for what they used in the recap.
Mm-hmm. Oh, could we just mention, back to Alfred lying on the floor for whatever reason, Alfred does mention in the final version anyway, a fondness for Shakespeare. And, Bruce has that hilarious line about, showing your familiarity with the bard, at which point Alfred pulls the head of the Shakespeare bust back.
Yeah.
That may be the only time that Alfred ever does it rather than Bruce doing it, though. So that struck me as an unusual little move, but perfectly appropriate to the line and to the comedy of, they're speaking of Shakespeare. We happen to have, him right here. And if he throws his head back, he'll let us into the Batcave. It's a nice little moment just playing with the fact that this is there. And, they're doing a Shakespeare scene in the library. So why not?
Yeah. So part of the duo's conversation about Penguin running for mayor takes place in the Batmobile rather than the elevator. Of course, all in the elevator is shot. Mm-hmm. In the draft here, Mayor Lindy is on Gordon's couch being attended to by a doctor who is, quote, stethoscoping him, unquote, and a nurse waving smelling salts under his nose. So, of course, we've got the pollsters, Gallus, Rupert, and Trendek. And now, of course, this is never spoken on screen, but Sherman refers to them as the Mad Ave pollsters. Now, I think he's getting polling and advertising confused here. Madison Avenue is the headquarters, or was anyway, the headquarters of advertising agencies, but that's not the same thing as pollsters.
Well, but they did market research. I mean, groups like Gallup did market research. So I don't think it's that far out of line.
Okay, but I don't know, were those companies based on Madison Avenue? I don't know.
You've got me. I'm not quite sure about that. I haven't watched Mad Men in years. Yeah, great fictional shows about Madison Avenue.
We mentioned already Linseed running as Batman's deputy mayor, which is a point that I had not noticed or missed in the past and wondered how he could install Linseed as mayor at the end, but that's how.
Yes.
And of course, Dozier says Batman isn't devious, so he doesn't like that point, but they do it anyway.
Well, they let him be deputy mayor, but they cut out in the final version, the shot version, they cut out the possibility that Batman might already be planning, or to cut him loose, just cut himself loose, and let Mayor Linseed become mayor in his place.
Okay.
You've got to run, Batman. I can run as deputy mayor on the same ticket with you.
So they leave the deputy mayor stuff. They just cut out the possibility of the two exchanging roles and Batman stepping down in order for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I'd noticed before that the exterior of Pengy campaign headquarters is the same exterior that was a bank in some other episodes. I particularly recognized it from Egghead and Olga.
Wait for me. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Apologies.
There's over a page in the draft that's cut about how Penguin is collecting campaign funds, including crooks handing over money and jewelry they've stolen.
Wallets.
There's a pile of wallets that have been pickpocketed by one guy, apparently, that he donates to the Penguin campaign. And so then they receive the I gave buttons, which you do see in the episode, but you don't really see anyone actually donating anything.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And Penguin is wearing one in the opening scene, which I guess implies what Commissioner Gordon, it plants a seed for what Commissioner Gordon tells us in a few minutes, which is that he's donated this, a large sum of money to the charity fund.
Yeah. Did you notice one hood on page 17 is referred to as Fingers, which has been crossed out and replaced with Slink. And of course, this broadcast was just the next week after the Liberace episode. So, they just had a character named Fingers. So, got to get that out of there.
Yes. As if anybody was keeping score of that sort of thing, but at least they are.
Bottom of page 20 of the final, that's where the Aunt Harriet scene is added.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dozier writes on the draft, little more whimsy in all the narration, not quite so straight.
Mm-hmm. That's page 21.
So that's interesting. So whimsy was a goal of the narration.
Yes, even though, as my friend Greg, the philosopher, sometimes says, whimsy is the death of art, which I like to sing back to him as, whimsy is the death of art, doo-dah, doo-dah. Whimsy is the death of art, oh, doo-dah day.
So, of course, in the final, we get a couple of scenes of kind of campaign hijinks, like the guy in the sandwich board defacing the Batman poster. Mm-hmm. But there are many more of these in the script. There's a guy who finds Vote Pengy written inside the bottom of a paper cup.
I like that one a lot.
There's somebody running a can opener, and they open the can, and inside the top it says "Win with Pengy."
Yeah, I think Sherman got a little addicted to his own desire to see, "Win with Pengy" written on tiny little circles, bottoms of cups, cans of vegetables.
And then a spectator at a baseball game catches a ball that has "Vote for Pengy" written on it.
See, another sphere.
Yeah. And when that guy in the sandwich board defaces the Batman poster and the cop comes after him, in the draft, the cop chases him a while before shooting.
Yeah, but here, in the final version, he just, draws his pistol.
Right.
Talk about a holy police brutality.
Yeah, nowadays that really lands badly. I mean, obviously they were just cutting it for time, but it makes a difference, I think, if there's no chase.
Right. The whole point of the policeman firing the pistol is so that we can see, instead of a bullet and a flash of gunpowder, we see the flag that says whatever it says, something about Pengy vote for Pengy. But that still makes it really hard to justify just pulling a gun on an unarmed person running away after painting a mustache on Batman.
Yeah, it's a capital offense to deface a poster.
Overkill, emphasis on the kill.
So in the scene where O'Hara's hat has a penguin message on it, and then also Gordon's back, the draft goes on further of Gordon and O'Hara discovering the message on Gordon's back, and it just seems unnecessary. Mm-hmm. It's besides the time factor, I think it just works better the way that they presented it on screen.
And as an aside, I would say that, having them discover it suggests that the GCPD is no longer the GCPD, right? They're beginning to learn, to find things for themselves that might be clues to crimes. What are they going to do? Why would they need Batman if they're gaining skills like that?
Batman, we became competent, so we don't need you anymore. We'll get along fine without you.
Yep.
In the draft, Batman won't kiss babies because he has a slight cold. Mm-hmm. So in the final, it's changed to the line about being sanitary.
What's your thought about that? Because, twice here in the treatment and the draft, we've seen him, claim a slight cold. And in the final version, he just says,
I'm afraid I can't do that.
What?
It's a rather unsanitary habit, you see. Babies that small are very susceptible to germs.
My child unsanitary?
I think the unsanitary line sounds squarer.
Yes, I agree. That's what I was wondering.
Anybody would say I have a slight cold, so I shouldn't kiss whoever.
And I wouldn't think that the baby's mother would get upset about that.
No. My child unsanitary?
Exactly. It's like, no. Batman meant, the child would be more sensitive to viruses and bacteria, but that's not how the mother took it. But there's no way to justify the mother taking it that way if Batman is saying that he's actually sick.
Yeah.
So this is a much smarter move.
On 27, Penguin is singing "Politics is the Game for Me" to the tune of "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?" Copyright Walt Disney Productions. I don't think that was going to happen.
Well, and then Waltzing Matilda comes up, which is an Australian. It's like the Australian national anthem, or not really the national anthem, but it's considered the kind of the folk national anthem of Australia.
Right. Page 29, I think, is the first mention of that in the draft. The Pengy girls are singing not to Yankee Doodle, but to Waltzing Matilda, which is both too slow for a campaign rally and, too Australian.
Yeah, Yankee Doodle is a much better choice. But why Waltzing Matilda? I have to wonder.
Now, the final script does refer to Little Egypt, the Belly Dancer, and Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Sure.
But it starts earlier in the scene where they're actually being introduced. So the Pengy girls sing right after Batman is stating his hope that the Penguin campaign will stick to the issues. Then we go to the Pengy girls singing, and then introduction of Paul Revere and the Raiders and Little Egypt comes in. And I mean, again, besides the time factor, it just works better as they broadcast it because you're going straight to the most decadent looking part of the Penguin rally, and the biggest contrast to Batman's hope for Penguin's campaign. That's definitely not sticking to the issues.
It's a great shock cut. It really works for me.
It's immeasurably better than having the Pengy girls singing first.
Oh, yeah. The decadence and the contrast could not be more obvious this way.
Now, here's a point where I feel like changes hurt the script a little bit. It hurts a joke. You can debate how funny the joke was. But it's the end of the Penguin rally scene. Penguin says his Penguin party is for mother, everyone cheers. Country, everyone cheers. Flag, everyone cheers. Alfalfa, everyone cheers. Then, as scripted, he then says, and mumbly peg, and gobbledygook. And then the old lady says, it's such a pleasure to hear plain, honest talk from a candidate instead of the usual political mumbo-jumbo.
Right.
But as broadcast, she's talking over the mumbledy-peg and the gobbledygook, which I think her line is meant to be a reaction to or a contrast to, but it comes in too early and you can't hear the most silly things that he's saying. So I think the joke just doesn't work the way it's broadcast.
My friends, the Penguin Party stands for mother, country, the flag,
It's such a pleasure to hear plain, honest talk from a candidate instead of the usual political mumbo-jumbo.
Yeah, I agree. It becomes muddled. And there's even a problem with hearing what she's saying momentarily.
Yes.
I think they probably just should have cut out that part of the script if they weren't going to let the joke land.
In the draft, Batman doesn't point out the initials for Grand Order of Occidental Nighthawks. So the joke isn't really hit hard enough. Of course, the Goon members do have GOON on their chests.
Sure.
But they're all in this Arab gear with fezzes and scimitars, such that there's no clear connection to the Penguin.
Right. They're just supposed to be like a lodge or something.
Yeah. And Dozier writes in, identify them as Penguin's men somehow. He says, good work, Finks, or some such. So, of course, they fix it by putting them in typical Penguin henchman clothes and giving them umbrellas to fight with rather than scimitars. But, yeah, also in the Arab theme, the scale death trap, it's not ice, it's hay that's being eaten by a camel.
Can you imagine Dozier reading a camel?
Right, and because the camel has to be right by the death trap, right by the scale, you can't use stock footage. It's not going to work.
Right. You can't just have a Kuleshov camel is like, completely out of the shot, chewing something, and then they cut back to the hay lessening.
Right. Yeah, it just wouldn't work. But yeah, I think it all worked out better as shot. Now, I did think, though, that the camel eating hay could work as a political joke because maybe he wants a straw poll.
Oh.
Anyway. In the final, after Batman spells out Goon, before going to Goon headquarters, we have a page of the script of Penguin telling Lulu that Batman is a goon. And of Penguin and Lulu square dancing and singing the campaign song to Yankee Doodle. Which, yeah, it's, again, I think it worked better as shot. That scene kind of broke up the joke. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by the way, Lulu doesn't really appear as a character until the final. I'm guessing that somebody said, we need to have sort of a quasi-mall for Penguin to share his thoughts with.
Right.
That he didn't really have before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So even though there are three women, three malls, more or less, who keep chasing around the dancers, only one of them gets a speaking part.
Yeah, well, one of the other girls says, I think in part 1...
Gee, I wish I was old enough to vote for you, Mr. Penguin.
The third girl also has a line in part 2.
Batman is no longer with us. As of now, it's a one-man race.
Then you should win it easily.
Oh, right. And then he says something about her needing, she can vote for him in his 4th term. What is she, like 8? 6? Good Lord.
By the way, I did a little digging on Lulu, played by Cindy Malone. Mm-hmm. I found out she was a recording artist in the early 60s. Discogs lists no albums, but 7 singles from her. One is a promo 45 to radio stations, which is referred to... It has some songs on it, but also something that they call an open-ended interview, which means that the DJ reads the questions off the back of the sleeve and Cindy's responses are on the record. Poof, instant interview.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love that. Wow, what a great idea.
Also, I found out that I'm thinking Cindy Malone must be a stage name because she's actually a sibling of Sam Stranges and Judy Stranges.
Oh. So there's nepotism afoot here too, eh?
Yeah. I mean, got me thinking it'd be fun to have one of the Strangeses on the show, but I don't know that there's any way. I looked around a bit. I couldn't find a way to contact any of them. And Sam Stranges would be in his 90s by now. IMDb doesn't give a date of death for him, so I guess he's still with us, but
Well, it may be just as well. I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to stop myself from calling him Stan Stranges, and making my SCTV joke, which he probably wouldn't get at all. On page 40, let me ask you something, Tim. Several of these politically charged jokes, which are not all that charged, but they are political, have got X's on them that were, ostensibly placed there by Dozier. On page 40, Commissioner Gordon has a line, there's no doubt that Batman can outthink the Penguin. The trouble is Batman is honest, and an honest man in politics is like a 3-legged horse in the Kentucky Derby. There's a big X next to that, and that's not the only political line or political joke that Dozier has apparently put the kibosh on. And I'm wondering why that joke, for example. Maybe because it would go over the heads of the kids, but there are other jokes that go over the heads of the kids relatively frequently.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because they're trying to cut. Dozier's trying to cut back on the number of jokes at the expense of the American democratic political system. I don't know.
Yeah, he might have felt that too many pointed remarks about politics would kind of go over the line somehow.
Or just maybe undermine the philosophy of the show in some way, but it's just something worth thinking about.
backing up a bit, in the death trap, when Penguin comes in and he's going to supposedly call the police about this death trap, but he's out of dimes, none of the scripts mention Batman and Robin looking at each other. And so it must have been director Oscar Rudolph's idea, and it really works for me.
Me too. We
need some sort of reaction from them to what Penguin's doing, rather than just being off camera for a long time. And it has some humor to it, them kind of looking at each other.
Yeah, it's like they know exactly what's going on. The Penguin's just, putting it all on, even when he wouldn't have to.
Mm-hmm. When Batman rolls off the scale into the acid, Dozier writes something about protecting his face. Quote, something about protecting his face, but it seems like they just fudge it. There's nothing in the final about why his face didn't burn off.
Well, as shot, he pulls his cape over his face.
Right. I guess that's the explanation.
Well, such as it is.
Quote unquote explanation.
It's the justification / motivation, but not necessarily. It's the excuse, I guess would be the best way to put it.
By the way, this is maybe a good time to mention, I had also looked into getting Phil Volk from Paul Revere and the Raiders on the show.
Yeah.
I looked at his website, and the contact link went to his Facebook. I sent him a message, and it's been like months now, and he hasn't even seen it. So apparently he doesn't check that anymore.
I see.
So,
well, it was worth a try.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how they ended up getting on this show.
Yes.
Like I gathered previously, it seems like, for what we saw of them on American Bandstand, it seems like they were into this show, and maybe they got their manager to get them on somehow.
Could be. Maybe they're related to the Strangises. Isn't everybody?
So before the debate, the conversation between Batman and Robin in the draft takes place in the Batmobile, not in the Batcave. So Alfred isn't putting makeup on him, and Batman's concern about Penguin's smear tactics doesn't get echoed in Alfred's concern about smearing the makeup, which is something I don't know that I'd even caught before, the repeat of the word smear.
Right.
This is ridiculous, Batman. Debating the Penguin on television when he tried to kill you not 2 hours ago.
Unfortunately, we have no proof. If I mention that, the Fair Campaign Practices Committee would accuse me of using smear tactics. I certainly wouldn't want that.
You'll have to hold still, sir. Otherwise, I shall be smearing the makeup on your car.
Sorry, Alfred.
There seemed to be a missed opportunity there as shot that they could have, because there's a track into Batman's face as he's kind of looking into the camera with his makeup just done by Alfred in the Batcave there. And then there's a bat spin. I think there's a missed opportunity to start on Batman's face at the debate, and then have the camera pull back as a kind of answer to the track-in. I was sure that was going to happen. Even this time, when I knew it wasn't going to happen, I still expected it.
So the script has a lot of preamble to the debate scene. Everything happening before the debate, and going there, and it really stretches it out. I mean, it would work fine if this were a movie.
Yeah, but it really is a lot.
Or a 3-parter, maybe.
Yes, with one part being the debate all by itself.
Yeah. I have to say, I still think Penguin's argument that Batman is always seen with criminals and he himself is always seen with the police is brilliant. That's probably my favorite part of the whole arc.
Oh, yeah, it's stupid as heck, but it's so funny.
Whenever you've seen Batman, who's he with? Criminals. That's who. You look in the old newspapers, every picture of Batman shows him with thugs and with thieves and hobnobbing with crooks. Whereas my pictures show me always surrounded by whom? By the police. I am associate of the law.
What he's saying is true, but he's spinning it in such a dishonest way.
Yeah, and Batman seems to basically have given up on trying to argue with that.
Shrug, whatever. Say what you want. The voters will be able to tell the difference.
Right.
Supposedly. So then when the word comes in about the robbery at the convention hall, then we have 2 long pages of Batman and Penguin getting from the debate to the convention hall.
Mm-hmm.
Although, did you notice one stage direction there is still calling it the bank?
Oh.
So that's just an error.
Well, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I noticed it when I was re-looking at it today. Page 48 of the draft.
Okay.
So Penguin arrives. He has a line. This is all cut. And then it says, he runs capitals into the bank, waving his umbrella.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just before the Walter Klondike bit, which is where the broadcast version picks up after cutting 2 whole pages.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the draft, the other reporters are called Chet Hinckley and David Bruntley, which connects them a little more obviously to Chet Huntley and David Brinkley.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering why that got changed. They ended up being Chet Chumley and David Dooley. And, we have the good night, they switched the Chet and the David. Good night, David. Good night, Chet. So, the connection is obvious. It's obvious what they're doing, but it's funny that they made the names a little bit less like the real people.
Yeah, well, certainly neither actor looks anything like or has been made up in any way to look like Huntley or Brinkley. They're not even imitating the voices any more than Walter Klondike seems to be imitating Walter Cronkite.
No.
Impersonating, I should say.
Yeah, it's just the names are similar.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line on 52 by Chet Chumley, or Chet whatever he is, saying, the fight won't be over until all the bodies are counted. Like, what? Are Batman and Penguin killing people?
Gosh, I hope so. It makes the fight even more interesting.
Did you notice there are a number of places in this arc where the scene is taking place in kind of a big place, like that convention hall fight scene or the rallies, and some lines are just kind of hard to hear. I was noticing in the fight scene where Penguin is being interviewed by David while Penguin is fighting, and I don't think I'd ever really caught what his lines were until I saw them in the script.
Mm-hmm.
So, and seems like they, in a big space like that, they weren't able to get a mic close enough in.
It's possible.
Or at least not without, the fighters running into the mic or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the state of, small mics was in those days. They probably just had to use a boom, and the boom had to get close enough.
I would think so.
So, page 62, Penguin's angry at the pollsters because he lost. Did you notice the scene got rearranged? Because his line about hang the pollsters is at the beginning of the scene here, and the pollsters don't actually get hung on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And, the pollsters' lines were also originally earlier in the scene. And another cut here where Gallus says, don't worry, we can always get a job reading TV shows. In the draft, he goes on to say they believe anything in that business. So maybe Dozier wanted to avoid criticizing the TV industry that much.
Right. And in fact, without that bit, when they just say, don't worry, we can always get a job rating TV shows, it's almost funnier that way, if you ask me. Just because we can assume all sorts of things about what that means for their reliability or the reliability of TV ratings, since these guys are total chowderheads.
In the final, page 60, so as broadcast, Batman mentions that Penguin has kidnapped the Board of Election, and Robin says, holy potluck. Like, what? This is another place where I felt like, well, the cut, at least Sherman would have winced at this. There is a cut there.
Mm-hmm.
Holy potluck, as written, follows Batman saying to the mayor, you'll have to proclaim the Penguin mayor in order to save the lives of the commissioners, unless we can find him within half an hour. Now, does holy potluck make any more sense after that line? So I guess it's like, it depends on whether we can find Penguin in the next half hour or not. So it was just kind of up for grabs. Maybe potluck works.
Or, we're just going to take the mayor we can get in the end. and hope for the best. Yeah, it's not clear to me either.
Yeah, I don't know. So then there's a bunch of detective work in the draft. Batman and Robin trying to figure out where Penguin is. And they set up this gray screen on the street, and Robin shoots a live broadcast of Batman talking in front of it where he's conceding the election to Penguin. And then it seems like, if I understand the script correctly, then they hear Penguin nearby crowing about winning the election. So they just happen to be near his headquarters. Oh, there he is. It doesn't work.
No, it certainly doesn't.
So before Batman and Robin put Penguin in the campaign literature packager, which is just called a bailing machine in the script, Batman says, "I take it you mean wrap up the candidate." And Robin's written line is just exactly. But I like how Bert says, "Oh, exactly." It has more kind of sarcasm to it. It doesn't sound so straight. You can tell that they're kind of winking to each other when he puts that "oh" in.
I think it's time for us to wrap up the election, Batman.
I take it you mean wrap up the candidate?
Oh, exactly.
Reading the script, I was thinking, it had been a while since I'd watched The Ark. And reading the script, I was thinking, oh, how gruesome. Didn't at least one or two Marvel villains, died falling onto printing presses and, dying horrible deaths? I could be wrong about that. But as shot, it's basically as cartoony as this show ever gets. It really does look like something out of a comic strip.
Yeah, out of a Warner Brothers cartoon with their heads poking out of the boxes.
Yeah, with these big holes cut in them for their heads. It's really funny. Really, really well done.
And the Penguin line, "I demand my constitutional rights," is not in any of the scripts. So that was added at a very late stage, and I think it's a better ending for the scene, rather than Robin saying, "If you need any endorsements, Penguin, just let us know." Now, the draft version of the tag is closer to what's shot, but Batman's still in the Batcave, and somehow both parties' national committees know how to call the Bat phone. And the Republican National Committee is mentioned by name, so of course we had to get rid of the word Republican.
Of course.
So, of course, all those changes are made in the final script. That's pretty much what we saw. I just have a couple of other comments from the board. Dell says, "When the three pollsters show up, it feels like this episode jumps the shark, and they aren't even funny. And not to mention that once again, the good citizens of Gotham City turn on Batman and Robin and embrace a criminal who has consistently cheated them in the past." Yes.
Yes, true. Because he has belly dancers and rock bands and free champagne.
And High C responds, "I think that's what bothers me the most. Making Batman look square is one thing. Making him the butt of the joke is quite another. To show 5 people in the room for his speech makes him look like an embarrassment." Yeah, and it doesn't square with other episodes where everybody's cheering for Batman and Robin.
Yeah,
like the second Mad Hatter.
That's why it feels to me like at least the agenda of making him win just because more people vote for him rather than through some kind of subterfuge is an attempt to undo some of that. But it's very hard to get those images of him, making a totally square, unremarkable, pedantic speech about politics, or not even about politics, just about how, he's worried about being worthy of his citizens.
But civic responsibility.
It's hard, yeah, exactly. It's hard to get that out of your head. Not all the votes in the world won't erase that. Oh, by the way, the suspense that's they attempt to build up to the climax of Sherman's script, the draft script, is basically vote count, vote count. Wow. Anyway,
but yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense that. I mean, sure, Batman doesn't want to pay attention to polls, and polls are not always right. But it's hard to believe that what the polling would be such a swing from what actually happens in the election, where Batman is polling way below Penguin, and then suddenly he clobbers him.
Well, but of course the pollsters are, apparently they, at least in one of these drafts, I guess it would be the draft here by Sherman, they apparently interviewed 12 people
Yeah.
So the polls could very well be wrong, but that part of their shtick doesn't make it to the final. I think the final version is shot.
That's in their first appearance in Gordon's office. There's like a whole page of them that's cut.
Yeah. I just wanted to make one comment about the music in the episode. Not only was Yankee Doodle Dandy a much better choice of what to adapt than Waltzing Matilda, which who knows how familiar Americans were with Waltzing Matilda in 1966. But there's a wonderful moment when during the fight scene at the convention hall floor, when we get this equation that I've written down as Hefty plus Sousa equals patriotic Batman theme. There's basically the Batman theme played in its entirety as a march. And it's gorgeous. It's Nelson, one of those amazing moments from Nelson Riddle that, really, I never noticed it before. And now watching the arc for the third time in my adulthood, I finally caught that was what was happening, and it's great.
Yeah, that's one of those things that we would want on the hypothetical Batman soundtrack album.
Absolutely. Right along with the minor key Old MacDonald from the first Egghead arc.
And the Anvil Chorus from Plot King.
Absolutely.
Hello, I'm Ken Holtzhauser, and if you're looking for something new in comic books, may I recommend my newest comic, The Quick and the Dad, a love letter to the DC, Marvel, Archie, and Harvey comics of my youth. This comic has everything. It has spaceships, dad jokes, alien invasions, time travel, supervillains, and so many bad puns. Hopefully you'll like it. It's the cutest comic you've never heard of, and it's available today in print and digital from indieplanet.com. That's The Quick and the Dad. Join that other dynamic duo, won't you?
Coming up, we start a listen to Adam West on The Merv Griffin Show and read your mail in the Bat Inbox. Help support To the Bat Polls and all the Deconstructing Comics shows with a monthly donation to the Deconstructing Comics Patreon page at patreon.com/deconcomics. For just $2 a month, you get outtakes from every To the Bat Polls episode, trivia quizzes on mid to late 20th century entertainment, and the right to vote on future Bat Polls topics. At the $4 level, you also get the right to have an ad for your own project on the show once a month, and hours of exclusive podcasts, including our walk through the early years of The Amazing Spider-Man. So go to patreon.com/deconcomics and select the level of your monthly donation. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. Beginning this episode, our Bat audio clip is of Adam West on The Merv Griffin Show from June 16th, 1967. Thanks to both David Maska and J.B. Anderton for sending it to us, and I think Chris Kavanaugh mentioned it to us once as well. The other voice you hear is Merv's guest, Hermione Gingold.
The phenomenon of Batman made television history a few seasons ago. It is still going very, very strong. So with a zap, pow, and a zowie, let us welcome the Caped Crusader himself, Mr. Adam West. I haven't seen you in a long time with your outfit on.
Well, that's why I wore the same suit, so you'd recognize me.
No, I didn't mean you were wearing the same suit, but since when does Batman wear the boots? Cowboy boots?
Well, these aren't exactly cowboy boots. I got so used to wearing the blue Courage Batman boots. Yes. I heard that you were the oldest living model, so I can talk about those things.
Of course.
And so I had some made up in brown and more conventional black, so
yes.
I'd be comfortable.
Well, I think you owe to say something to Hermione beyond. I heard you were the oldest living model.
Yes, that's not very
Then
nice.
add a compliment.
Oh, no, it's lovely.
No. Let me handle your affairs.
All right.
No, I don't mean that
I wish you would.
either. Yeah. Well, that puts me in a bad position, Hermione. What was I going to say?
That's very funny.
Now, get yourself out of that one.
On this living model you've got as far as.
Hermione, he's,
Or should I say mannequin?
Oh, you revealed.
I see. That's not the part of the sentence that I said that was wrong, right?
No.
It's not the word model.
No.
It's living, oldest, what?
Oldest,
Oh, I don't mind. I am terribly old. I love being old. I don't see why anyone minds it. Because then you're so experienced, don't you think? Oh, well, you don't know. You have to experience it yet.
Yes.
But sometimes I'm quite sorry for young people.
So am I.
Huh?
What are you doing off the chair?
Can you see that in the columns? Hermione and Batman.
I love it.
He's available, Hermione.
Yes, but I don't like flying.
Oh. Well, Hermione, I don't really fly. I swing.
Oh.
It's a thing with the bat ropes that we do.
That is very different.
Bat Inbox on episode 181, Who Was Reuben Watt? I noticed on the Bat board that the Batman 66 message board that this particular episode has gotten more views on the Bat board than any other recently. You know, it's over 1,000, I think, at this point.
Oh, wow.
So, people just, apparently people wanted to know who Reuben Watt was and went there for the download.
Yeah, they said, good question. Who is Reuben Watt?
Who the heck is Reuben Watt? So, Danny Cool writes, really enjoyed Randy Waldman's take on the Batman theme and learning more about Reuben Watt. It's striking how little progress Hollywood has made over the years, now decades, and including more Black American voices both in front of and behind the scenes in TV and movie productions. Yes, it's true, and it's kind of sad to see great directors like Charles Burnett directing episodes of CSI Miami. Not that they that it's beneath them or anything, but there are some great African American directors who've just kind of been kicking around in television after several years of making some really stupendous big screen movies. But anyway.
So we're paraphrasing some of these. They got a little long, and this episode has gotten a little long, so paraphrasing somewhat. But this is from Batwinged Hornet. Guys, thanks so much for the profile of Reuben Watt. He's a name next to no one, in bold, has ever mentioned in the endless histories and assessments made about the series. By the way, I just checked. We're at 1,494 views of that post.
Yeah, it's a big jump from the nearest contender, at least on the first page of the Bat board.
And he goes on, since he was in the Dozierverse, Reuben Watt was, I wonder if he worked on the Green Hornet or the Tammy Grimes show. Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to find out. Since IMDb apparently is only looking at credits that were actually in the show. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the problem. The IMDb is a great resource, but I think you probably have to get IMDb Pro and pay the extra premium before you could begin to get, and maybe you couldn't even that way get credits that aren't actually on, don't actually roll on the screen at the end of an episode.
Yeah, I suppose it could be submitted by a user if we had proof. I mean, as far as Batman, we do have proof. We have the article that we talked about in that episode.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have photographic proof, at least.
Yeah, so we could conceivably. I mean, but the problem is we don't know all of the episodes. Did he work on every episode or just some of them?
Right. There may be no way of knowing unless we, try to contact the family and see if there's a journal or something, some kind of recorded information about his work on the show.
Okay, back to Batwinged Hornet. While race may have played a role in Watt not being credited, on the other hand, a point I made some time ago was someone at Greenway cast African-American actors in various non-stereotypical roles on the show, such as a police officer, a security guard attacked by Zelda, and partygoers at Wayne Manor, the latter being a pretty big statement that a black couple were prominent and socialized with Commissioner Gordon and the richest guy in Gotham. Mm-hmm. And a reporter in the movie, yes, with speaking role.
Yes, and I should just point out that in the Hizzoner the Penguin arc, there's an African-American man, bound and gagged alongside a white man. I believe when Penguin is capturing the election committee.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's not a speaking part, and he's not exactly in anything but a compromising position, but, you know, there is a, you know, African-American face on the screen briefly.
Mm-hmm. So, while Watt's treatment or mistreatment did not help the cause for African Americans in production positions, for millions of viewers, they were presented with very positive images of African Americans during the height of the Civil Rights Movement.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And paraphrasing, Hornet goes on to talk about Charles Washburn, another African American assistant director who worked on Star Trek. And he provides some scans of articles about him. So you can follow the link in the show notes to see Hornet's full post with those scans.
Yeah, definitely worth having a look at.
He also points out that some of the really escapist sitcoms in the 60s, we were talking about how Batman or other shows may have been meant as a distraction from Vietnam. But some of these silly shows were in development or even on the air before the Vietnam presence really increased after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in August of '64. He names Thriller, Mr. Ed, The Outer Limits, and My Favorite Martian, and those are all 1963 or earlier. And that Gilligan's Island, Bewitched, The Munsters, The Addams Family, and so on were set to air in the fall of '64. So it seems like, there was something in the water even before Tonkin and even before Kennedy was shot, which might have been another thing to prompt escapism.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's also worth thinking about that perhaps those shows that were in development got the green light faster, or definitely, got the green light when they might not have because of, what happened in the mid to late 60s. But that's just speculation.
Yeah.
So thanks for the reminder about that, Batwing Hornet.
Okay, Paul, take the next one. Next two, actually.
Larry A., responding to Batwing Hornet. Don't forget others, such as Don Marshall as the co-pilot of Flight 612 Spindrift in Land of the Giants, one of my favorite Irwin Allen shows. There was more than the lovely, wonderful, loving Nichelle Nichols of Trek. There were quite a number of African Americans in differing positions in all the Treks. Oh, yes, absolutely. Then High C writes, great stuff. In terms of Watt, I suspect he wasn't on IMDb because he was not listed on the end credits themselves. Yeah, that sounds plausible. Also, he usually was listed second behind the credited assistant director on the call sheets, e.g. Steve Bernhardt / Reuben Watt on Ring Around the Riddler. Right. His role was quite important, I think. My guess is he was the liaison between Dozier Horowitz and the first assistant director du jour. As the constant, as you noted, he knew how Dozier and company wanted stuff done and communicated that. Right, consistent presence on the set. As for your question, here's how I see it. Beyond the horrible sexism of the script, a huge problem with Nora Clavicle is she was a poorly conceived character. Okay, it is established that she is a crusading feminist, fine. Yet her entire plan hinges on women being completely incompetent. It doesn't match up. Right, she's trying to destroy men's world by putting incompetent women in lofty positions.
Destroy everybody's world.
That's right.
If they're that incompetent.
Yes, the world just implodes, at least of Gotham City. High C continued on about Nora, so follow the link to the thread to see his full post.
Yeah, and he mentioned some things there that made me really want to get to that script. Apparently, he's seen the script. I'm really interested in seeing if it's any better than the final product was.
Yeah, I'm kind of itching to have a look at it too, although I'm sure some of our listeners are going to think, oh no, not another mention / episode about Nora Clavicle. We have to think about those horrifying, wind-up mice again, presented as though they're and the set that they're on that looks like something out of a off Broadway play or a junior high play like the ones I was in.
Some of those had better sets than that.
Maybe one or two.
So I don't know maybe people just got tired of Bat questions. We got no response to the last several ones that we posed, and then the lack of response caused us to forget about even posing a new one in the last episode.
Right, and maybe that's got something to do with the inattention to the questions too, that, we were not all that consistent about them, so why should the listeners be?
So I guess we're going to set that feature aside, but Before we do that, we're going to, next episode, give our answers to the remaining 3 questions that we didn't cover in episode 181, which were an original piece of bat equipment, a rhyme for the two-way crimes of Two-Face, and who should have had a window cameo and what would they have said to the duo. So we'll talk about those questions next time. And if you'd still like to comment on any of those, feel free to drop us a line. Listen to the contact information at the end of the show.
And I'm going to hold the window open for a dope prize for the rhyme with the two-way crimes of Two-Face. If anybody comes up with a good one, and send a few if you feel like it, we'll see whether we can send you a non-sealed, non-signed, non-delivered dope prize. In the tradition of Marvel Comics. So it's not a real prize, but you get your name on the air. Ooh, that's so difficult to do on our show.
And we'll also go on to the next issue of the Batman 66 comic book, issue 9, featuring, of all people, Zelda the Great.
Ooh, maybe she's teaming up with Nora.
So, we'll see you again in 2 weeks here at the same Bat RSS feed. Check the show notes for links to the scripts we talked about, to Here Comes Batman by Scotty McCay, and to the 66 message board thread on our Reuben Watt episode. If you have any interesting Bat audio that we haven't used yet on the show, you'd like to make a donation to the show through PayPal, or you just want to drop us a line, the address is batpoles@deconstructingcomics.com. You can also comment on the thread for each episode and each script at 66batman.com/forums, or on our blog at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. We're on Twitter at Decon Comics, and on the Deconstructing Comics channel on YouTube. You can hear outtakes from this and every episode of To the Batpoles and vote for topics for future episodes by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics. You can also help us out by shopping via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, by sharing our episodes on your social media, and by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And spread the word. Let all your friends who are Batman 66 fans know about the show. Next time, we answer our own Bat questions and discuss Batman 66 Comics number 9, featuring Zelda. Keep working on your magic act, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. To the Batpoles is a production of deconstructingcomics.com.